So it is, we're not going live for real this time, rather than me just sitting
Steve,
there and just talking to myself.
happy Monday. Little behind the scenes at OSW Daily. I love it.
Yeah, I guess people can see if they want to over on Facebook how late you actually come to the show. And, you come on and you just go, yeah, my wife kept me
Unscripted.
busy. And, yeah, we can talk about whatever we want on live. So I guess there's a little bit of behind
Blaming
this.
my wife on things. That's terrible. I hope she doesn't see this. I'm kidding. Thank you. I love you, hon. How was your week?
That's funny. Weekend was good, man. Weekend was good.
Good.
Yeah, no, it was good. Beautiful weather. Got outside, relaxed a lot. Really
Yes.
good, really good. What about yourself? How's
Yeah.
Virginia?
Virginia was beautiful. It's cool. It was not yet humid and hot and sticky, so a lot of time outside, sitting, enjoying the outdoors, the breeze, and the bird song. This is my new favorite thing, Steve. I listen to the birds sing and I wonder, which bird is that? And I try to see if I can find the bird that's making that noise. It's my new hobby. I'm going to become a bird watcher, I think. It's very relaxing,
Uh,
seriously.
no,
Very relaxing.
it is interesting. So I have a lot of trees in my backyard, and I go to sleep, fall asleep with the birds chirping away. I go to bed early, so it's that's pretty standard, and you'd expect that. They also wake me very early. So often at night, Mike,
Ah,
I wake up and I go, do I hear the birds? And if I don't hear the birds, I just go back to sleep. If I hear the birds, it's about time to get
time.
up. It's
Yeah,
time.
that's
So
cool.
they do keep my clock going. I guess maybe I'm on the same clock as the birds. I don't know, but
You are.
anyway,
Early
there we
bird
go.
catches the worm. And that's what
Well,
you are.
I'm still trying to find those worms to catch, though. I have to confess, I am the early bird, but I still got to find that worm.
Uh,
But
you're doing
there we
great.
go. There we
The
go. So
OSW word, worm.
OSW word, worm. So today I kind of continue on, I guess, from Friday's conversation, right?
Yeah.
I noted a few weeks ago, maybe it was a few weeks ago now, where I put up a survey on Open Source Workplace, how many people want to return to the office full time when everything reopens, and what is that percentage, and how many days do other people want? So we give an option from 0 to 5, and 19% today, over that period of time, 19% are saying that they want to return to the office full time. It's still a really
Only. Only
low statistic. Yeah.
19%. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really low statistic, and I saw something out there this morning, and it was on LinkedIn, and I just didn't click the article fast enough, and it was just gone from my feed, and I couldn't find it again.
Ah, hate when
But it
that
was a
happens.
headline. It was a headline that said 15% want to return to the office full time, and that's what triggered me to go back and have a look at the survey.
Hmm.
So it's 15%, it's 19%. Whether one's right, one's wrong, or let's say we're 50% wrong and say it's 25 to 30%. It's still a small number of people that want to return to the office.
Yeah.
And over the weekend, I did watch a CNBC put together a work in progress video that they put out on YouTube, and it was looking at the big tech companies. And it was looking at the big tech and sort of their approach to returning to the office and what they think the future is, and
Hmm.
sort of dovetailing into that a little bit. And some of the things we were discussing on Friday, Facebook published released a statistic. 75% of Facebook employees expressed some interest in moving to a different city. Now, Mark Zuckerberg's been very
Oh,
open. He's been very honest and sort of, fine with people working from home, and sort of, he knows it's a very fluid situation, and how people return to the office is there's a lot of uncertainty about that this time, but that's a huge number, 75%. And
yeah. If they just leave,
there's,
what if they leave the area and then they have a once in a blue moon team meeting? You can't just pop into the office anymore,
yeah,
right? It's
and
it's a permanent deal at that point.
no, it is. But what's really fascinating about this video is CNBC then produced a couple of headlines that from 2019. So this is pre-COVID, and it
Okay.
was regarding, again, focusing on these big tech companies and sort of the cities that they operate. So looking at San Francisco, looking at New York,
Sure.
and a New York headline from September 2019: New Yorkers are leaving the city in droves, and here's
Hmm.
why they're moving and where they're going. So there's almost, before COVID-19, there was an exodus from New York City, and I guess it's probably as people get to a certain age, then they perhaps think differently. They got families and look at that way. But here's something really interesting: San Francisco. 35% of San Francisco's consider leaving for good, according to a city survey. And that was November 2019. And then a couple of
Wow.
headlines, just sort of what does that look like in the COVID-19? And these are two headlines from May 2020. Manhattan faces a reckoning if working from home becomes the norm. So in other words, will people still stay in Manhattan? Will people, hang around? And I have a few thoughts on that, but I'll just move to the San Francisco headline, and we can just sort of, I'll open up and I'll be quiet for a little minute, let you get some thoughts out there. But in San Francisco, 2 out of 3 tech workers would leave San Francisco permanently if they could work remotely. That's a
Wow.
staggering number,
Yeah.
staggering number. And that's from May 22nd, 2020, you know?
Yeah, you're talking about these cities that are the most expensive places to live in the world, right? I mean, these are the places you hear about how difficult it is to find a place to live, let alone afford it. And you have traffic that's beyond anything else. And you have companies that I remember being amazed in recent years visiting those cities and seeing this new infrastructure that had been built up where you work in San Francisco, for example. One part of the bay is where you live, and then the other part is where your office is. And the company would pay for a bus with Wi-Fi, air-conditioned, shuttle bus to take you from point A to point B each day. So you actually have an extra 2 hours sitting on the bus commuting where you're working in these little mobile cafes. And I thought this was going to be the new norms to allow people to have affordable housing. They kept having to get further and further away from the city center and still being required to go into that office. So to pick up what we were talking last week, Steve, these surveys come out and I think those are honest answers. You were saying, do you think these surveys are honest answers? I do. When you're talking about broad surveys, people's real feeling, yeah, only 19% want to go back full time to an office. My question was, I was struggling with it a little bit, if I recall, because I kept thinking about employer surveys asking employees what they want to do post-COVID, or as we get into the new normality of opening offices again. Who wants to come back? And how are you doing at home? And even if people are struggling at home because they don't have the proper workspace, or they don't have the ability to separate from their personal lives, their kids having to do all that goes along with that, and maybe other responsibilities, difficulties at home, they don't want to go back, whether it's for fear of the virus or other reasons that we can't anticipate. But then there's this idea of, I got to tell my employer I'm doing really well at home because I don't want to be forced to go back. If I want to be, if my productivity has dropped, they're going to expect me to come back or want me to come back. I think that's going to be the real area of controversy or contention. Not sure what the right word is, but concern for me is when those different opinions collide, when an employer starts saying, okay, we need you to come back. And maybe that'll be driven by, maybe you can address this. What piece of the puzzle does the real estate portfolio play? And then tell me your thoughts on Manhattan. You said you had a thought when they said Manhattan or New York City would have could be a devastating shift for New York City if all these people leave or don't want to come back to workplaces. So kind of as an employer perspective, as a real estate perspective, and as a city perspective, if that 19% number holds up and 80+% of the people do not want to return to offices, what does that mean for us as an economy and as companies? Can you kind of think about that and tell me what you think as far as your
Sure.
professional opinion?
Of course, I'm happy to. But obviously, the point of clarification here, just it's 19% want to return to the office full time. There is a portion of the community or the workforce that want to return on a part-time basis, right? So
Okay.
there's probably
So they want that
35,
office to be there.
40%. Yeah.
Yeah.
So they want it to be there, but they want it to be used for their own convenience. And convenience is probably the wrong word, because convenience seems like, it's there, I'll use it whenever I want. It's more of, I believe, employees, I believe, typically know the best environment for them to be productive. You know where you need to be, Mike, whenever you have a certain piece of work. You go sit in your seat to do different types of work, even at home today.
Sure.
You'll move through the house depending on what activity you need to do. And it's the same thing, I think, for employees as they consider the future of work. At home today, I can do the work that I've got to go 100% focused. I can do it in no better environment than in my home, where I can close the door and I can lock myself away. So I think there is employees who do have that perspective. So just do want to clarify that. But since I put that question on Open Source Workplace, I've been asking everybody who I chat with, be it informally, be it in an interview, be it in whatever context. I've been asking them, obviously, where they live. If they tell me it's New York, London, San Francisco, Chicago, Boston, big cities, it's like, so what sort of things, how do you feel emotionally about returning to the office? What are the things that you're hearing yourself, but also from colleagues, or perhaps employees within your organization, right? So if
Yeah.
it's workplace leaders or CEOs, what are they hearing? And the whole context being is, to this point, will people leave big cities? And there are many people who have left cities today. One, because they have a second home and they can go. Two, they have the financial resources to actually relocate for a period of time. And people who give me that answer, I ask, when do you think you will return? And they don't have plans to return often for the next 12 to 18 months. And the
Hmm.
reasons often given is not the virus, it's more about their kids and stability, because schools, when they open, schools will not operate as they once did. They will be on a rotation basis, they will be on a flexible schedule. And it's really hard to manage family life whenever you don't have a consistent schedule. It's hard for the parents, it's hard for the kids.
Oh, sure.
And so,
Yeah.
therefore, they expect some sort of form of homeschooling to continue. So, they want to manage that. So, they're planning to be away. And then you go a little bit further. Well, if they're going to be outside of the city for 12 to 18 months, how do they then go back to a small apartment living in the city and that city life, right? What are the benefits of that and how do they do that?
Hmm.
Then you get the other people who respond, well, yeah, I know colleagues who are in the city or who live close to the city, and they're going to stick it out. There's those who are people who are, they move back in with their family because their family live close to a city. And they're actually excited to get away from the family again because they can have that independence. The big concern is when they go back to the city and they sort of want that city life, will that city life be as they remembered? Will the bars, will the restaurants, will the stores, will everything that sort of created that environment, will that still be there for the next 12 to 18 months? Or will a lot of those businesses go out of business and therefore the environment will not be quite the same? So, we won't be able to go to
Yeah.
the bars the same, clubs the same, all those different things. And that's sort of what's bubbling up. Then there are those of a certain age, or sort of maybe in their late 20s, early 30s, or maybe thinking about family life. And they're like, no, I'm getting out of here. I won't be moving. I'm looking for a house somewhere in the suburbs, maybe in a different city. So those are the different things that I'm hearing that sort of help suggest that in the short term, some of these statistics that we're seeing where it is 15, 19% sort of support some of the conversations and things that I'm hearing and the groups I participate in. And that's what's sort of coming through. And the fact that so many people are moving towards, actually, I do want to be at home more, and I'll go into the office when it best fits me and the tasks that I need to do.
This reminds me of a statistic or a paradox example that I used to
I know
always
you love your
quote last year.
paradoxes.
And it was a survey, and I'm going to get this wrong, but in broad terms, it was probably about generations and younger people, what they look for in an employer. Certainly, this was at the peak of pre-pandemic war for talent. What does it take to build a workplace that attracts the top talent you need? And there was some kind of striking statistic that was 70% of potential employees trying to decide on an employer say that the environment of the corporate headquarters, the office space, the design, the amenities, all those things that as workplace leaders we talk about, creating an inviting environment, 70% say that's an essential, or maybe even higher. It was something like 70 or higher percent. So that's an essential part of the decision whether I'm going to work for this organization. Paradoxically, that same amount of people or somewhere close to it said, at the same time, I don't need to be there to work effectively, meaning I want to get a job with a really cool workplace, but at the same time, I don't need to necessarily be there. So how do you reconcile those two
Mm,
ideas? You're talking about all these different factors, right? The migration away from big cities, the big tech companies like Facebook saying you can work from home permanently, and then people saying, well, I'm going to actually move out of the area. I'm going to leave Silicon Valley, or I'm going to leave New York. And well, but when I want to come back, I expect to have this office with all the amenities ready to go for me when I need it or I want it. Well, as you were beginning to allude to, well, a year from now, 18 months from now, if all these businesses that depend on the mass commuter coming into the city to use their restaurants, to use their gyms, to use all these different businesses that depend on the people in those buildings to be their customer base, if they don't survive this, and then if an employer decides we got to find ways, in this new economy to cut expenses and we need to reduce our real estate footprint, and those fancy offices with those amenities start becoming a victim of this change, then there's going to be a disconnect there, right? I mean, is that what you're thinking? There's a big reconciliation or a big kind of conflict on the horizon, because we can't sustain both, can we?
it's a really important question, and it is. You're absolutely right. Was absolutely a trend towards creating space with amenities. There was a desire to create an office to attract talent, and that was often seen as a huge attraction. And you're right, it's employees didn't want to use the space all the time. And the sentiment that sort of had been floating through the workplace environment and the workplace industry is flexibility, right?
Yep.
Employees want flexibility. Employees have always wanted flexibility. Employees have recognized with technology, I now can work from anywhere, and that anywhere doesn't have to be the office. And actually, I perform better when I don't go into the office because there are certain activities that allow me, or I'm enabled to do them better somewhere else.
Sure.
And again, just go back to the start of the conversation, it could be at home. But then there is the office. When we go into it, we want it to be a certain thing, right? The office gives us something special, something unique that we can't get anywhere else. And I think as we go through this process, I think that's what the workplace and the office environment needs to be able to do. How do you entice, how do you attract employees to go back? What is it that you're going to create, or a workplace is going to create, that actually bring employees in, that employees go, that the only place I want to be today is in an office because it does X, Y, and Z for me. And that's the question. And those are the things that I think many leaders are actually thinking through right now and actually trying to address.
Yeah. How do you do that in the COVID-19 world? Because that's my biggest concern in the near term, and that would potentially extend to the longer term, is I don't like the picture that's being painted. And I haven't returned to an office at all, and some have already. So I'd love to hear from them if they have returned to their workplaces and have seen the new protocols and the new safety procedures and the very sterile environment. I read an article late last week, didn't bring it up on Friday, but I think it was Salesforce's CEO was talking about the new return to office and what it might look like. And he was, this is one of those tech companies that was so forward thinking and putting together incredible amenities and great workspaces for their employees, attracting people to the office, really standing out, right? And setting the bar, much like a Google or a Facebook. So he's saying, no, now it's going to be the need to be almost like a hospital setting, sterile and cold. I mean, I don't know if we use the word cold, but I think of a hospital as being cold and sterile and uncomfortable, because you're always on alert that you're in a place where germs exist. And if you're going to have those protocols, and we need to, I'm not saying this is not necessary in the near term with our fighting against COVID, and we all need to be mindful of this. But is that a place that's going to attract people? All the cafes will be closed.
Yeah.
All the coffee areas will be closed. Lunch will not be served. A lot of these companies were giving free, breakfast buffets, lunch buffets, dinner buffets. It's going to be no breakfast, no dinner, and box lunches distributed during the middle of the day. I mean, when you start reading some of these, it gets downright depressing, doesn't it?
It does. And actually, as you were chatting, I just recall watching something over the weekend. It may even have been this morning. I can't remember, but it was about the hotel industry, and it was illustrating what hotels are having to do to be able to allow guests to stay. And if you think about how the Four Seasons attracts someone to stay compared to what some of the cheaper options attract people to stay. And if you
Right.
think about all the activities that you just articulated and the amenities that the Four Seasons will attract a customer compared to one of the cheaper other options, and it's the gown, it's the slippers, it's the gym, it's the pool, it's the food, it's the bar, it's the restaurant, it's the ambience, all those things, a
Right.
different type of setting to sit and go through. And then it sort of concluded, well, okay, so how do you differentiate hotel manufacturers or hotels if there actually is nothing to actually separate them, right? So then you take everything you just said and then you have a look at the workplace. All those benefits that you just articulated, if they're all eliminated, how do you then, how do employers then attract talent? Because it's really hard to differentiate today the workplace environment to make that an attractive tool. We don't know whether in 12 to 18, 24 months, whether that will change somewhat. But in essence, it just helped me just to take what you just said and sort of reframe and actually see it physically, actually what that means. And I don't know
Yeah.
how you do that. It's a great question, and it's something that time will tell. Um, but yeah,
We were
it's
looking to the
great.
hotel industry. That was funny. We were
Yeah,
looking at hospitality as a model for offices and for workplaces. And a lot of the co-working spaces and a lot of people I interviewed over the last several years were repeatedly referring to the concierge type service you get in a hotel or any type of a hospitality center. That's the new norm for offices. We need to create that same experience in our workplaces. So maybe here's my hope. Maybe that this is a temporary concern and all the things we just described going away and all the new normal of sterile environments and hospital-like settings is just temporary. Maybe it's 12 more months, maybe it's longer, but let's not throw out all the great things we have done over the last decade or more as workplace leaders to evolve our offices, our workplaces, create these amazing communities with activity-based working, agile, flexible, just different spaces for different activities, all those things that make, and all the amenities that keep people their happiest and most productive during the day. I mean, that would be the ideal. If this was just a pause, albeit a long one, it sounds like it's, at first we thought it would be a couple months. Now it's going to be a couple years, maybe. I don't know. I mean, is that your hope, is that we can somehow navigate these waters for a period of time, however long it is, and get back to what we were doing before? Or do you think we're forever changed by this?
I don't know. It's a good question. I think we are forever changed. I think organizations are forever changed. I think employees are forever changed because these are perspectives that neither party really ever could envisioned, right? From an employee perspective, many employees didn't really have the perspective of working from home full time and what that would mean.
Oh
Employers
yeah,
never had the perspective of working from home full time and what that would mean.
good
So
point.
the lenses have completely changed, right? So I don't think, I think it's hard to then go back to what it was before. Activity-based working, like you said, I think is a model that potentially could provide a framework to think about the workplace of the future, because actually activity-based working is designing the workplace for the activities that are going to take place there,
Yep.
and digging through what employees do and what they need to deliver and the outcomes they need to achieve. What activities do they do to get to there, and what is the best environment or the place for them to do that? And I just think it's a great framework to sort of get to there. And I sort of look at myself and I go, okay, so how do then what activities do I do? what activities do people like me do who manage real estate portfolios, who manage workplace, that do design and so on and so forth, right? So how do we then evaluate what our value is to an organization, and how do we maintain and sort of maybe reinvent ourselves to
Mm.
continue to be able to contribute and provide value for the organization? So there's a lot of thoughts in there, Mike.
Yeah, no, you got me thinking about some principles about human behavior that I've always found to be true and I've always referenced when it comes to adding amenities. And then once you do it, you can't really take it back. Once people get used to a certain level of comfort, a level of experience, it's going to be really hard to say, okay, that was temporary. We're going back away from that. And you just reminded me, one of the big, huge things that people didn't know about, many didn't experience, was working from home. And for some, it's been a great, great joy and a pleasure to have no hour-and-a-half commute, like all that stuff, all the tension from sitting in traffic, all those things. You can't all of a sudden flip a switch and say, okay, go back to your old life, because the genie's out of the bottle or the horse is out of the barn. Or it's like that idea I used to say, once I flew first class once, I had a free upgrade to first class. It's really hard to go back to coach after you experience that, right? But I mean, you do, because you can't afford it all the time. But and maybe that's part we could go next time. We're out of time today, but maybe next time we can get into some of the details about how employers are going to have to manage these now new expectations of their workforce, now that their eyes have been opened to what it means to have no commute and flexible work schedules and work from home. And you're going to have to be in a position to direct certain people to come back, and certain people may not want to. That navigating those is going to be one of the most difficult things. But in this current economy where there's so many unemployed, so many out of work, it's going to be that financial piece. Like me going back to coach, it's like I can't afford to fly first class all the time. So even though I know there's this better thing available, it's not for me today, and I can't get there, but maybe in the future. Same thing, when it comes to some special experiences, we used to have at baseball games, for example, the Diamond Club. Once you go to the Diamond Club at Nationals Park here in DC, it's hard to go back to the cheap seats. So as human beings, once we've experienced this life and have developed some habits around work from home, I think that's going to be one of the biggest challenges employers and workplace leaders face, is dealing with those expectations. Because my mom used to say, or my dad used to say, somebody used to say, disappointment is born from unrealistic expectations, or is a result of unrealistic expectations. So if we have our expectations here, and what we all of a sudden our employers asking us to do is down here, there's going to be this disappointment and lack of satisfaction in our work. So interesting road ahead, for sure.
No, it is. And it's sort of just taking that thread just as an introduction maybe to what we talk about tomorrow. I think what we have to look at is, okay, what are employees missing from the office? Employees are missing people. They're missing interaction with their colleagues. So how do we create an environment that allows the interaction of colleagues? So whenever they come together, they all come together collectively. And what is the purpose of that coming together? Do we really want the entire team coming into the office and sitting at their desks and looking at the computers, or do you want them interacting, and how do you create those experiences, right? So I think that's something we could chat about as well.
I love it.
All right, man. Well, great chatting. Good conversation this morning.
And I'll see you
tomorrow. Yeah.
Have a good day.